Hello, everyone, and welcome to another polYMATHY podcast. I am here today with the team behind another graphic novel that's being written in Latin as well as Italian and English. And I would like you, Francesco, to introduce us to the whole team and everybody behind this.
Sure. Hello, Luke. Hello, everyone. We are NUBES, a small publishing house. We are active from an year and a half, and we make comics, as Luke said, in Latin, English, and Italian. We begin with Origine Spictae, which was only in Latin, an historical comic in Latin. And then we made a tragedy by Stefano Vittori, Medea Daimones, Maxentius Postremus Romulus, Maxentius the Last Romulus, in 3 languages. And now we are making Ammianus Vesper Mundi, or Ammianus The Twilight of an Era, written by Marco Cappelli, who is here with us, and is the host of a very famous podcast in Italy. He also won a prize some years ago, the best non-English podcast. And Marco has the project to tell us all the history of Italy from Emperor Constantinus to our days.
It's a bit ambitious. It's a bit ambitious.
Yeah. It's a fantastic podcast. We'll talk about that too today. Continue, Francesco.
Sure. Is with us even Salvatore. Salvatore is the translator to Latin of the comic, and in some minutes will be with us Martina Montrasi, the artist of the comic book.
Wonderful. Welcome. Yeah, welcome everyone. Well, so let's start at the origin, perhaps, of this text that we're looking at. Ooh, this is the English text, but I believe you wrote this originally, Marco, in Italian, right?
Indeed. And it's a story that I wrote for the podcast, and it's a very peculiar episode of my podcast, because it's the only episode which is not basically an essay. Most of my episodes, all the episodes except this one, are small essays about history. But this one is more like a short story that I developed in a couple of years ago in order to explain the history of the passage between late antiquity and the medieval time in a way that could resonate with people, I thought. So, and it all started from basically an archaeological finding, which I studied. So if you want, I can tell the story, but I don't know.
Well, yes, we do want at least a summary of the beginning. We heard when we did a podcast with a couple of you last week in Latin on Scorpio Martianus, we heard some of that story, but we also want to hear it today from the ex ipso autore, from the very author himself. Yeah, I'd like to see, Francesco, do we have an image of the archaeological item which inspires this?
Just a minute.
Good. Yeah, I'd like to see that again.
So while Francesco looks for it, basically, I will explain the story. So when I was in high school, they taught me that Goths and Romans that lived in the same kingdom for a while couldn't marry. So that's what I knew. And then, while studying the period, we're talking here about the years between the 490 and 540. This is what I discovered. I mean, of course, I'm not the first one to discover it. This has been uncovered. This ring has been uncovered about 100 years ago. It was uncovered in a small villa in Piedmont, in northwestern Italy. And the interesting thing is that this ring, this is a wedding ring, which I find it extremely charming. First of all, a wedding ring like we do, with the names of the couple, I find it extremely charming. But beyond that, this was found together with several precious objects. The majority were Roman in origin, from the 5th to the 6th century, but there was also a small collection of jewelry, female jewelry, clearly belonging to a woman, of the Goths, in the style typical of the Goths, the Danubian style. And we had this ring where it's written Stefani and Valatru. It's an abbreviation, Stephanius Valatruda. So Stephen, Stephanus, and Valatrud. And of course, Stephanus is probably the owner of the villa, a Roman, and Valatrud is probably a rich, very important Gothic woman, which I thought that was such an incredibly beautiful story in itself. And when so after a while, I was thinking about this, and then I realized the fact that this was found, and it was found as typically, it was hidden away. So I thought this was probably hidden during the Gothic Wars, which were these terrible wars that are included in the comic book and the story, so they're part of the story, and they were never uncovered. So people didn't come back to retrieve it, which means that most likely Stephanus and Valatrud died during the war. So that's what really, and at that moment, I felt such a sadness for this story, because this is a symbol of a potential future between these two communities, and a future which was interrupted and never came to be. And so made me extremely sad at that moment. And at that moment, I decided I want to make a story out of this. I want to try to tell the story of Stephanus and Valatrud. Of course, it's fictional. However, I tried to make it as realistic as possible, so that it would be something that could have happened during this time. So this is the beginning, and really in just I will say in a day, I had all in mind more or less the idea of what I will write, but the podcast doesn't work like that. I usually write the episode maybe a few months earlier than before the time that I need to go live. So I did actually set on it. So I had it in mind, but I didn't write it. So but I had it clearly in mind what I wanted to write. So when it came the moment to actually put it down, it took me very little, because I already knew the entire story in my head. And Stephanus and Valatrud are not the only characters. There are several steps. There are other characters. I will say the villa itself, where they live, is a character. There's a book which is a character, and there is a very important person that is neither Stephanus nor Valatrud, which is probably the main character.
Yeah. Well, fantastic. It's so interesting. Do you find that having done this experiment of telling an involved story to convey history, is that an effective way of teaching history?
I think it's extremely effective. I'm not a novelist, so it doesn't come to me naturally. Let's say this was really something that came out easily. So, but yes, I think it's very effective, especially if you want to tell, basically, you want to bring the great history a bit down to earth. So in this case, I really wanted to convey what it meant for Italy, for the people that lived at that time, this incredibly important period of change. And I thought the best way to tell it was really to show it at ground level. And of course, unfortunately, until we reach later years, I don't usually have this kind of information, family information. I do sometimes can get glimpses of family lives. Recently, I told the story of these Totoni that lived in northern Italy in the 8th century. through contracts, basically, just knowing a few contracts from their family. But usually we don't have that kind of information. So in this case, in antiquity, there isn't really an alternative to novelization to really show the life of common people. I thought that's kind of the reasoning behind.
That's true. That's a very good point. When we study history, which is something that all of us who learn to read Latin and Greek, we end up doing. We end up being immersed in history. But who wrote it? Especially, say, a lot of the literature that we have, usually by people who had the free time, the leisure to do so, and they usually weren't necessarily the poor people. Even if they could read and write, they may not have had the time. Well, Francesco, could we see some of the Latin? And then I want to ask Salvatore about his translation.
Sure, just a moment.
Yeah. Yeah, that's really exciting, Marco. By the way, just before we started, I got to meet the wonderful little meower that's you might hear in the background, this beautiful beautiful cat that Sonia and Francesco have, and
Yeah.
and so I can hear it on the audio, so you may hear that too in the background. If you do, that is the other member of our
Yeah, yeah,
uh,
yeah.
party.
The
Is
third
the
member of
sixth.
NUBES.
That's right.
Is the
The
sixth.
sixth. That's right. The sixth member. There she
There,
is.
there she
Oh,
is.
The
ciao,
real owner of
cari.
the company, our president,
Oh,
the empress.
carispera,
CEO.
cari. That's adorable.
Buono,
Yeah.
bellissimo.
Oh, yeah. Oh, adorable. Well, so Salvatore,
Yeah.
you were tasked with you were tasked with translating from Italian into Latin this really fascinating story. How did you go about it? Because this doesn't take place in the classical period. It takes place at the beginning of the medieval era, right? So what did you decide to do with the Latin? Did you decide to use Latin from like a later Latin, or did you do something else? What did you decide to do?
Well, my opinion is that I had not to repropose a realistic version of the story. So the language of the story in the center of the story. I had to translate it into a classical Latin. That is a language that is like the English translation. It is for the public, of lectors, of readers. So I chose a very classical Latin that is the standard Latin that we all study in schools. And so I decided to use not uh, the Latin of the 6th century, but the Latin of Cicero, of Catullus, and of all the actors, all the writers that we commonly read when we read Latin. And I also choose to put it into an complete Latin, not a scholastic Latin, that is a Latin that maybe choose to not use some grammatical features. So I use all the possible grammatical features, but in an easy style that could be also a dramatic and a colloquial style, because it is a Latin not for an history page, but for a novel. And I had to approach this fact because also when I read the Italian text, I noticed that the Italian text was written for a colloquial graphic novel and not for a treatise, for example. So I had to accommodate my own Latin to this kind of genre and to write a Latin that could have been the Latin of Cicero, the recognizable Latin of Cicero, but in a as a how can I say in a dress that can be uh, very
Informal.
informal, yes, informal and very convenient to this graphic novel. And also I had to uh, confront myself to the letting of uh, some peculiar characters in the graphic novel. That is, some strangers that speak Latin. This is for German people, for example, who speak a Latin that is in some way not perfect. And I had to reproduce the imperfection of German people while speaking Latin, German or
Armenian, I think we had
Armenian,
also
yes,
Armenian.
Armenian
So
people that used a grammar that is not correct grammar. So I had to find a middle way between a Latin that could be recognizable, still recognizable, but that can reproduce the peculiarity of a foreigner speaking Latin. And this was very challenging for me, also because this was my first work of this kind. That is, I never translated a graphic novel into Latin before, and this was very, very, very fascinating for me because it is an exercise that we do in school, that is translating, but always with some texts that are in some way like sand, that are without soul. In this occasion, we had a text that had a soul, communicating with my own soul and inspiring to me also feelings while I was reading the story and translating it. And this was very, very fascinating.
Wow, that's fascinating. I especially approve. I approve of your choice to use classical Latin because that's exactly what this should do, right? Such a text like this should be available for late beginner or intermediate Latin readers, even advanced readers, to increase their understanding and their appreciation of classical Latin, since most Latin is written in that dialect or something very close to it. And I see that we just have arrived. The artist
Oh,
Oh,
Martina.
Martina. Hi,
hello, Martina.
Martina.
Sorry. Hi.
Hi.
Here
It's
I
okay.
am.
We were just admiring now your artwork. I was just responding to Salvatore about his translation, and Salvatore, how you
Okay.
chose to put some foreign speech, so not foreign speech, but foreign maybe barbarisms or something like that into the Latin. Can you give us an example of that? I'm fascinated.
Here is an example. In the beginning of the story, we have the young Callistus, the protagonist, who meet a friend, the young Zwintila. Zwintila is a young goth. In this scene, Zwintila speak with a German accent.
Yeah, they're playing a sort of soccer, and when you say victory, victory, like
Yeah.
Victorian.
Victory. If you go up, you can see it actually. If you go
Sure.
up,
Victoriam.
show don't
Victorian.
show don't tell.
Victoriam. Fenihuk.
Victoriam.
So that's
That's
kind of the little uh, Easter egg that you can find across the comic book.
I love
And
that.
we also chose to keep a small detail that shows the change of Latin. So when the main character is teaching Latin to a little girl, he's teaching her to write modus, so which is a unit of measure. Sorry, modus. And of course, the little girl says, "But it's modus," like to say, like to make a bridge between Italian, modern Italian, and classical Latin, which of course would have been modus. So
Right.
so again, so that these are the little Easter eggs that the reader may find.
That's fantastic. Well, I highly approve. Yeah, that's where like mezzo comes from. Medius, medios, mezzus, mezzo.
Yeah, that's
So yeah,
that
exactly.
kind of D that starts to soften, right?
Yep. Yeah, exactly. Well, that's exciting. Now I'm already, of course, I already bought it. I already contributed to the Kickstarter myself. I recommend you also, if you want to get your copy out there sooner, support these wonderful creative people who are making this work in Latin, in Italian, and English, which means, hey, what if you're an English speaker and you want to learn Italian and Latin at the same time? Well, look no further than Nubes, and you can get your copy both Latin and Italian. See, I love doing that because then I get to have, I like having bilingual works. Where's my Aristophanes? I don't have it handy, but I have Italian and Greek Aristophanes, so I can practice my Italian too. It's very it's a great way to do that. So, Martina, welcome. I want to hear too about the artwork. My father was an artist, so I have the highest admiration for artwork in all forms. Could we see some more images, Francesco?
Yeah, sure.
And Martina, I'd love to hear from you about your experience as an artist and how you came to attain this amazing skill. I wish I could do something like this. I never was really that artistic myself. So please tell us a little bit about how you made certain artistic decisions.
Yeah, hello, my name is Martina, and this is a really interesting project. One of the most of my favorite parts are the colors, because I didn't know it, but in this historical period there are a lot of amazing colors, and I'm really happy that the project was colored, because I think it's one of the most interesting parts of it. And I also use the colors as a way to express the emotions of the characters. So, for example, if the characters are sad, it can be the rain or the fog, or if there are parts that have to express hope or a new beginning or something like that, there are colors like the sunset or the sunrise. And I think it's a good way to express the emotions of the stories and of the characters. Another thing that I loved was creating the manor, the house where the characters are settled. So we decided to, yes, here it is.
There it is.
And we decided to have a very important work on it, and we at the end have a character design of the manor, like if the manor is a human being, because it grows and changes a lot during the story, and this is really interesting. And another.
Yeah. Let me explain, because the villa, this farm residence, it's the story of this farm across several decades. So Martina did a really good job at showing how it changes through these about 50 years that the story goes through. So we start as a Roman villa and we end up with a medieval village. So it's a very, of course, not entirely. There are signs that stays the same, but we have this evolution, which, by the way, is archaeologically proven. So we are not inventing here anything, because that's exactly what happened to a lot of Roman villas in this century. So we are trying to show what the archaeology tells us through the comic book.
Here is the first time we see the villa. It's a Roman villa, and then chapter after chapter, modifies. The characters grow old, and the villa grow old in some way. Martina before spoke about character design. In comics, we used to make the design of the characters before we start the real job, because we have to know characters are made, and we approach the villa as a character, like Martina said, with a character design for the villa.
That's great. That's just like in I'm so impressed by the artwork here because it is so cinematic. Really good directors try to make the scene with the rain, with the colors, with the sfumature. I can't think in English. The
Nuance.
things.
Shades. Yeah.
There nuances and shades. Thank you. To convey emotion and to help the audience perceive and understand instantly, which is, by the way, exactly what we need as readers to help understand the story. One can have just a plain text, and if one is a good and fluent reader, well, that's great. But having such detailed visuals with such personality in them, including inanimate objects like the house, like the villa, really helps us understand. It reminds me of Downton Abbey is an example of a television
Yeah.
show, a
Yeah,
very
yeah.
popular one, where the house is a character in a way. It has, or
Indeed.
in Star Trek, the Starship Enterprise, or if it's Deep Space Nine, because the best Star Trek fans like Deep Space Nine.
Yes.
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 Bravi. Okay, good. I'm
That's showing now Deep Space Nine to my daughters, so that's why I feel,
Wow.
I feel
Learning Greek, watching Star Trek. Now that is paideia. That is education.
Exactly.
That's
Paideia
fantastic.
indeed.
It is. Well, this is absolutely beautiful, Martina. So this helps us, because if we think of all the what I think of as soon as I saw the first of the NUBES, hold on, I have a couple of them here. Pardon the delay. But I'm very proud to have one of the first copies of course, Origine Spicta, and of course I have Medea right here, and just knowing how helpful this will be to so many people, and not to be inspired to then learn Latin. Latin isn't necessarily this really awkward, uncomfortable, terrible thing, as unfortunately it can be for a lot of people. It could be something intensely beautiful and fascinating. History too. So something like this helps us get into history, right, Marco? And so you've all put together this amazing project, and it's a great inspiration, I think, to all of us. What I would love is to hear from you and Sonia, Francesco, about how you actually turned this into the format of a comic book, because it starts as a story written in normal prose by Marco, right? And then you convert it. How does that work?
It was a radio drama, an audio drama, because there was already all the
characters
the
and
character-
the voices.
the voices.
And
They was
different
already
voices, yeah.
speaking. What really was strange at the time I first heard it, it was really a moving story, emotional story. We used to ascoltare,
To listen.
to listen to. I'm sorry, my English
Mixes with Latin.
All languages are welcome here.
We used to listen the podcast to have a historical narration, and in this episode, Marco told us an emotional story, an historical tale, said, but very moving. And so it was already dramatized in a way. We have only to decide where and when to show things, and here and then add anything to better explain the history, because the listener of the podcast already know the story because Marco explained in a lot of episodes. Maybe our readers don't know anything about the Gothic War. It's not a period very famous. So we just add here and then bits to inform the readers of the period of time.
The great power of the comic is that we can choose what to show and in which way to show it, because we give all the instructions to the drawer, to the artist, and then the artist put in his art and make something new, something real, and it's incredible because it's a way to show, and also if you want to teach something. I think that another character in this story that resonates a lot with NUBES vision is the codex, the book, because in NUBES we think that languages are not rocks or obstacles, but are bridges, both can unify, can link different people, can bring stories from a person to another, from the past through the future. And that's what happened in a certain way. Yes, Rome is dying, is really dying, it is really at its end in this story, but something goes on, and it's the word, and the words that can bring with them the light of the great civilization. Rome is a sort of lighthouse during a very strange and difficult period like this. It is an age of passage, of very strong changes, a confusing period where things are changing very quickly. And this codex, this book, is something that will guide the main characters during their life from a word at the beginning to another that we show at the end of the comic book. And I think it's something that really matches very well with the NUBES vision of comics and of narration in general, because telling good stories is something that as publishers we want to do, and first of all, we like to read and to tell stories, and we want to do because I think a beautiful story, a captivating one, can be like a sparkle. It can warm you, it can give you the pleasure of the light, but also can light the fire of maybe a new passion about a new subject, maybe history, maybe Latin, maybe English or Italian, we don't know. It's like a seed. We just throw it in the wind and we see what happens. But we are sure that with the pleasure of reading something beautiful, something captivating, the readers will be happy. And this is the first thing that we want. Then when people is happy, everything can happen.
That was really eloquently said, Sonia. And in fact, I'm moved by the passion that all of you bring to bear in this discussion. It's fantastic. What I would love to do, especially before we leave, is Francesco. I would love, since this was a radio show, radio drama, like you said, I would love to find a scene, any scene that you like, maybe just at most a page, that we can all read together in Latin, Italian, and English to see all. I like the
in
trilingual.
3 languages.
If you like, I would find that exciting personally to go from the most ancient to an old and very classical medieval language like Italian, and then into our modern English.
We already read a page in the other line. We want to read the same or another one.
Oh, another one's fine, unless you really like that one.
Marco, what scene do you prefer to read?
No, you pick one. Maybe towards the beginning, or I don't know, because it's easier to understand, or I don't know. I really don't know. I don't have a preference in that case.
And if there happens to be one with
Very hard to choose.
with 5 characters, if it's possible, I'd love everybody to read. I don't have to
we
read.
we did that one also in Latin. Was about the arrival of the Franks, I think.
Yes, and we made.
And that was 5 people. That was 5 people, more or less.
And the other day in Latin we read the same one, but we can read.
Oh, we can read it again.
yes.
If there's 5 people, it's Martina. You want to read some Latin?
Well, I don't know the Latin, but
you know the story, though.
Yeah.
Sounds great to me. So, go ahead, Francesco. And Francesco, tu scegli chi fa quale parte? Oddio. Whatever part. And that way, Ooh, wow. Great.
Just a moment, because my computer is very slow.
No, it's fine. And and if you can make the text large so we can see it clearly.
Sure.
My screen is a kind of like, it's turned into the size of an iPhone on my computer.
Okay.
Okay, now it's readable.
CBR.
Forse ce l'avevo già di qua.
Ooh, cool.
Okay, we can start from the beginning of the scene this time, from this panel, Quid illud. We just have to choose who is who. I don't know. You want to be Balatrud?
The of same, course. It's the
only woman, and Luke, Salvatore,
so
Marco, Martino. Salvatore, which part do you want to do?
It's the same. I don't know.
Someone have to decide.
Scegli Salvatore.
Start with Callistus.
Okay.
Only because I will recognize him.
I will be Stephanus. So you are Balatrud, I'm Stephanus.
My beloved.
Okay, perfect. It sounds very good. So I can be the Goth, I guess, Swintila.
Very well. And Luke, you are Deus Dedit. You only have one line to say.
Okay,
so maybe it's better if Luke does Swintila, because we will hear a much better Latin.
Okay.
No, I want to hear you. Come on. I'll do Quid illud or whatever. Which one is it?
Fumus neque procul.
Okay, great. Ready.
Bene. Salvatore, you go.
Quid illud.
Fumus neque procul.
Fortasse Franchi sunt, Calliste. Contra eos iter faciam cum exercitu, ut eos aliquantis per continuam.
Villam relinquere de betis, et aufugere.
Questo credo che in realtà ero sempre io.
Sei sempre tu.
Maybe.
Villam relinquere de betis, et aufugere statim.
Quid fit?
Atsunt Franchi, domine. Oporte tabire. Currus parate, necessaria tantum modo conferamus.
Cartas administrationis ferreo portet, et Calliste, oro te, gemma saltem dominae.
Tempus non sufficit, domine. Sillas gemas inveniant tecum, intellegant quisitis, atque quiscit quid vobis facturi sint, donec alias divitias obtineant.
Omniaec nunquam fieri debebant, perspique cum Teodato locutus eram, ei dixeram, quaenam ratio erat malasuntam occidere, nulla ratio.
Mi dilecte, facut Callisto suadet, Nilus es de rebus pretiosis curare, maximi momenti est salutem petere.
Quot mortui sunt, quanti dolores.
Nunquusque nobis pepercerant, sed fieri non poterat ut sic pergerent res.
Noli curare, amiche mi, omnia sepeli, hic erunt cum reverterimus.
Ooh.
The end.
And believe us, this moment is very
That's
strong.
great.
When you
Very
read all the
yeah.
comic, is very something that you feel inside your heart.
Ok.
And
Adesso
now
in
we
italiano.
move to Italiano.
Yay.
Italiano, number 2.
Do you have
Same
it?
characters.
I have it.
I put you on the spot,
Martina,
Francesco.
Martina, vuoi
Thank you.
fare tu invece di me? Fai Swintila, così fai anche
Ok.
tu.
Ottimo.
Allora, un attimo solo che ritrovo la scena.
Torno per l'inglese magari.
Eccola qua.
Mai letto in italiano, cioè, nel senso letto, ma mai recitato.
Eccoci che parliamo. Ecco, questo è l'input italiano per chi sta studiando l'italiano.
Esatto.
Purtroppo adesso sentite lo straniero, l'americano, però ok, vamping complete. Here we go.
Salvatore.
Cos'è quello?
Luke.
Oh, fumo, oh Dio, fumo è a poche miglia.
Debbono essere i franchi, Callisto. Andrò loro incontro con l'esercito per rallentarli. Dovete lasciare la villa e scappare, ora.
Cosa succede?
I franchi, domine. Dobbiamo andarcene. Preparate i carri, portiamo solo l'indispensabile.
Dobbiamo portare i documenti contabili e... Callisto, ti prego, almeno i gioielli della signora.
Non c'è tempo, domine. Se vi trovassero quei gioielli addosso, capirebbero chi siete e chissà cosa vi farebbero pur di trovare altre ricchezze.
Tutto questo non sa, sarebbe dovuto accadere. Ero stato chiaro con Teodato. Glielo avevo detto. Che senso poteva avere uccidere a Malassunta? Nessun senso, nessun senso.
Mio adorato, fai come ti dice Callisto. È inutile preoccuparsi delle cose preziose. Ciò che più importa è mettersi in salvo.
Quanti morti, quanta sofferenza.
Eravamo stati risparmiati finora, ma non poteva durare.
Non ti preoccupare, amico mio, seppellisci tutto. Saranno qui quando torneremo.
E anche qui momento emozionale.
Ma guarda la sua faccia,
Etichette.
Look at his face. Great job, Martina, with
I agree.
Thank you.
that character. Yeah, it looks.
It's a really sad part.
Yeah.
It's emotional.
Yeah. All right, and now in English.
I can leave Callistus to Marco.
Ok. So I'll do Calixtus. And Martina, you stay with Swintila.
Ok.
And one quick question, è già esistito il codex in questi tempi dalla Roma di questo secolo?
See? Yes, I guess I will answer in English.
Oh yeah,
so that-
I'll repeat the question. Did the codex already exist in this century?
Yes, indeed. This is the time when actually we start seeing codex from the 4th century, the first ones. But because the question is between codex and rolls, no? Papyrus rolls, which were much more common during antiquity. However, in late antiquity, we start seeing codex and they become really dominant in this century. And this is actually included in the comic book. So we did another little Easter egg at the beginning of the comic book. One of the characters, Valatrud, gives this book as a gift to one of the other characters and says, I know that you prefer rolls usually. However, this one was available only in as a codex. So showing that this is the other person is a bit old-fashioned, while you have. So you see, it's included. It has been thought of.
Wow. I have never made that. That's a 1,500-year-old transition, much as we transition now. Here, I can. Here's the Kindle version.
The
It's like I
Kindle,
really
the
prefer
e-reader.
paper
I
books.
prefer paper, please.
I know, but here it is anyway. Wow. Yeah, that's interesting.
And there is another Easter egg, because I thought when I was writing the story, I said this is too expensive a gift. So I said, so in the scene, she says, okay, the guy says, I cannot accept, it's too expensive for me. And he says, no, don't worry. Of course, once you are done, you will deposit at the library of the villa. Because of course it doesn't make any sense to give this very expensive gift to a person that is actually the employee. So of course it will stay in the villa. It's not his in that sense, but it's a gift that it's given to him and he can read it. So which I thought was a much more realistic kind of gift than just giving it, here, it's yours, it's all yours.
That's a good touch. Yeah, it's like giving it. Yeah, here's the family iPad, but you don't give the whole thing.
Yeah, but again, it's even more than that. It's like saying, okay, here is a car.
Yeah,
a car, a very expensive car, and if it's somebody it works for you, you don't give a car. You say, okay, you can use it for a week. It's already it's a big gift already, that you can use for free a very expensive car. That's kind of, and it's more than a week. So I was trying to make something that would be realistic as a gift.
That's interesting. That reminds me, actually, Marco, of how in history, most of the time, soldiers had to pay for their own armor, depending on the ancient Athenian hoplites did. In the Roman Republic, it was very frequent, and medieval times. And knights, if you had to pay for your own horse, you were clearly wealthy. But it's even more than owning your own car. It's more like you bought and pay for your own airplane or something.
Exactly.
It's really expensive.
Yes.
So, yeah. Anyway, go ahead and read, everyone.
So I'm Calixtus, right? What's that?
Oh, smoke just a few miles away. Darn it. I can never remember it. I'm terrible.
It must be the Franks, the Callistus. I'll march forward with the army to hinder them. You must leave the villa and flee, now.
What's wrong?
It's the Franks, Dominus. We must leave quickly. Ready the wagons. Grab only the essentials.
We must bring our ledgers and... Callistus, please, I beg you. If nothing else, the lady's jewels.
There is no time, Dominus. If they found those jewels in your possession, you will give yourself away, and who knows what they will do to snag further riches.
None of this should have happened. I'd been clear with Theodad. I told him. Why kill Amalasuntha? It made no sense. No sense at all.
My love, do as Callistus says. There is no point worrying about precious baubles. What matters is getting ourselves to safety.
So many dead. So much suffering.
We had been spared until now, but it could not last.
Worry not, my friend. Bear it all. It shall be awaiting our return.
Nice.
Wonderful.
And
Well,
so we did the three languages.
That's
Fantastic.
cool. I love all three languages. But yeah,
It was fun.
Yeah.
But the translate, especially the Latin and Italian, that was a lot of fun. Especially to hear from the actual creative team who made it a reality. I know you've done this 4 times now, you at NUBES, but still, I still think it's really impressive every time because it's just so. Like I could never do that, but it helps all of us so much to learn Latin, or if we want to learn Italian or English for
English.
people who are trying to, for those people who only know Latin and they want to learn English. I know a couple people. They they exist. So so wonderful to hear all that and to see it. So beautiful. When can we, those of us who are contributing to the Kickstarter, like myself, when can we expect to get our copy in the mail?
In about a month, because yesterday Martina completed all the pages. Now we are doing some little things like add the faces of the bakers who choose to appear in the comic, and little things like that. The Kickstarter will be out in a week, and then just the time to send it to print, receive it, prepare the shippings, and ship it.
That's
1
fast.
month,
More or less 1 month.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay.
The half of November, second half of November, just to be sure.
Just to be sure.
Wow.
Maybe we should tell them people where to go so they know.
Absolutely. There's a link to the Kickstarter, which is in the description. So you can find it there very easily. Also, speaking of links, if you want to hear the original podcast that Marco did, you can simply Google Storia d'Italia, or you can go to italiastoria.com, giusto? So,
Yes, italiastoria.com.
Storia, so italiastoria.com, right? I think I said
.com.
that right.
Yes.
Right. Or you just Google, you see his, he
Yeah,
put his,
if you
right
put Storia d'Italia, often I come up.
it comes right up immediately. And a quick question, this is interesting from André, excuse me. I would like to ask if the Germanic elites and the New Kingdoms adopt a form of late Latin or maintain their languages like the Normans in England.
So
do you know? I don't know this at all.
Okay, it's hard to say with 100% certainty. However, by all the little hints that we have, we know that both the Ostrogoths, we are talking here about the Ostrogoths, but just a generation later, and besides, that's included also in the comic book, the arrival of the Lombards, the Langobards, but also the Langobards abandoned their ancestral language quite quickly. So probably the Ostrogoths still spoke it. Actually, quite surely they still spoke it, but they spoke Latin very well. In the army, we know that Gothic was used, and we know it from a little very interesting tidbit. One very important Roman member of the Senate at the time of the Ostrogothic kingdom, so we're talking about Theodoric the Great time. There is this guy in the Senate, and he wants his sons, which are senatorial family, very rich people, but he wants them to do a career in the army, and the army has adopted Gothic as the normal language because they are almost all Goths. So the sons, it's written in one of the letters of Cassiodoro, we know that the sons studied Gothic. So Romans studied Gothic in order to work in the army. But we know that all Goths in general spoke also Latin. So they would have probably abandoned it very quickly if the war didn't turn out as it turned. So many of them died. The one that survived also disappeared. So probably they merged into Roman civilization. And we know the Lombards abandoned their Germanic language in maximum 2 generations. So again, Latin triumphed because, of course, the local population and the weight of Roman civilization was so strong that it was hard to keep a Germanic language. But we do have some traces here and there in Italian. So there's a lot of words in Italian that come from Lombard, and there are also a few that come from Gothic. So actually they left trace. And some of the words in Italian that come from Lombard are very, very common, like guancia, like that is cheek, and again, which is not Latin origin. It's a Longobardic word, and Dante actually is particularly the Tuscan dialect is had a lot of Lombardic words because it was a Longobardic region. So so actually there's quite a few that are into Italian. I don't know.
No.
That's very long answer to a short question. Sorry.
No, that was considering the complexity of that situation, that was a very short and succinct answer. And thank you. I was curious about that. I find that interesting too, that considering Indo-European migrations, say the Greeks into Greece, it's like the Greeks came into Greece. That doesn't make any sense, but that's what happened. And then the dominant language is the one of the colonizers or the invaders, and also of the Italic languages. But then the Romans brought Latin everywhere. But in this case, we would expect the Lombard language to dominate, but it didn't,
No.
which is contrary to the pattern. So there are all sorts of, that's just such a fascinating combination of
Because
archaeology and anthropology and linguistics.
Yeah, but because the weight of Latin, you know, everything was written in Latin. If you needed to write to anyone, you write it in Latin. Deeds were written in Latin. Even deeds, you know, like normal contracts between people were only written in Latin. So it's just such a tremendous weight, strength that could not be overcome by simple conquest. I think that's the difference between the two cases.
Yeah, that's a fascinating thing. Well, that's a discussion for another time. But thank you to each and every one of you, Sonia, Francesco, Marco, Martina, and Salvatore, for offering us your time today so we could see your work in progress. I can't wait to have my copy. Grazie a voi tutti.
Grazie a te, come
Grazie a te,
sempre.
Luke.
Grazie, thank you, bye.
Bye.
Ciao.
Grazie a tutti gli ascoltatori.